China's top diplomat issues a warning to the White House. He instructs Biden to reverse Trump-era support for Taiwan and not to overstep in what China deems its domestic affairs. A new bride's family is torn apart just after her special day. Her husband and their friends are being detained by Chinese authorities in Hong Kong over their involvement in pro-democracy activism. A company-wide layoff notice marks the end for a major Chinese microchip maker. That's even after the Chinese regime poured billions of funding dollars into it, an attempt to fight U.S. technology sanctions. And the Chinese regime's economic data isn't adding up. Officials reported a boost this year, but the numbers show the opposite. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. The Chinese regime's top diplomat is going on the offensive over U.S. policies. He warns the Biden administration to reverse Trump's support for Taiwan, saying the U.S. should not cross any red lines. NTD's Michael Corder has more.
China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi called China's claim on Taiwan an insurmountable red line and added there's no room for compromise. He says the Biden administration should completely change the previous administration's dangerous practices of crossing the line and playing with fire regarding Taiwan. The Trump administration had sent high-level officials to Taiwan and increased weapons sales. Beijing says it will reunite Taiwan with mainland China by force if necessary. Wang also warned the U.S. to stay out of its internal affairs, referring to human rights abuses and genocide. The day before leaving office, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo declared China's actions in Xinjiang as genocide. Since President Biden came into office, the Chinese regime has been pushing him to reverse Trump-era policies. Former Trump officials are urging President Biden to maintain a tough stance with Beijing. They say the former administration made progress on trade and national security issues that Biden should maintain.
I hope that this administration, I hope frankly that the American people will continue this project.
Some Biden administration officials also agree Trump's China policy should be kept. They've described their stance on Taiwan as rock solid, though a number of China experts expect the Biden administration to soften the U.S. stance toward Beijing. The Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, claims Taiwan as part of its territory. On the other hand, the democratic government in Taiwan also considers itself the rightful government of China. It is officially known as the Republic of China. Reporting by Michael Corder, NTD News.
The U.S. is strengthening its military presence in the waters of the Indo-Pacific. This is believed to counter Communist China's increasing aggression in the region. More by NTD's Don Ma.
The U.S. is proposing a new tactic to deter Chinese aggression in the Indo-Pacific. A new network of missiles would cost close to $30 billion over 6 years. As per Japan-based newspaper Nikkei, the proposal said the military balance in the Indo-Pacific has become unfavorable for the U.S. It argued that without U.S. deterrence, China will have the courage to take military action in the region. Head of the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, Admiral Philip Davidson, warned that the greatest danger the United States faces in the region is the erosion of deterrence to China. He added, quote, "We must be doing everything possible to deter conflict. Our number one job out here is to keep the peace, but we absolutely must be prepared to fight and win should competition turn to conflict." The plan comes in light of China's increased military presence in the South China Sea. Beijing claims sovereignty over much of the region and has built artificial islands and military outposts there. It has laid airstrips on them in an effort to strengthen its military capacity. An international tribunal deemed China's sweeping territorial claims unlawful in 2016. The tribunal said that China had violated international law by endangering ships in the area as well as fishing and oil explorations. The proposal comes amid Beijing's plans to ramp up military spending. On Friday, China's Premier Li Keqiang announced a $200 billion investment plan for China's military for 2021. That's around a 7% increase from 2020's budget. As for the U.S., Congress approved a total defense budget of $690 billion for fiscal year 2021. Reporting by Don Ma, NTD News.
Republican Senator Marsha Blackburn will introduce a new bill that requires oversight of sister city partnerships between the U.S. and Communist China. Blackburn presented the Sister City Transparency Act during the last Congress. She is set to reintroduce it in the coming weeks. Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has warned that China's Sister City Partnership program is managed by the CCP's official overseas propaganda department. A research paper by the Hoover Institute also identified China's Sister City Partnerships as a political tool that Beijing uses to indoctrinate people at a local level. The research says, quote, Beijing understands clearly that local leaders today become the national leaders of tomorrow. The legislation will put the program under closer scrutiny and identify the extent of the CCP's malign activities in American communities. It will also require an investigation report by the Government Accountability Office. It's an independent agency that works for Congress. It provides a source of nonpartisan information on government operations. The U.S. currently has 157 sister city partnerships with Communist China. The Chinese regime's decision-making body is making changes to Hong Kong's electoral process. The move comes from Beijing's National People's Congress during its most important political conference of the year. Expected changes include giving pro-Beijing members more voting power in the city's electoral commission. That's the body that selects Hong Kong's chief executive. The change aims to make sure the majority of Hong Kong's lawmakers are so-called patriots, or those who fall in line with Beijing's policies. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi says the move will improve what he called Hong Kong's long-term stability and give the city a brighter future. China imposed a strict national security law on Hong Kong last year. Critics say it ramped up suppression of the city's freedoms. So far, dozens of pro-democracy activists and leaders have been arrested under it. This after Beijing postponed the Hong Kong Legislative Council's elections for a full year over pandemic restrictions. Beijing maintains that its actions on Hong Kong, as well as Taiwan and the Xinjiang region, fall under the category of internal affairs, and that foreign countries should not get involved. Chinese authorities have said that under the Trump administration, the U.S. crossed the line and was playing with fire. And more on the situation in Hong Kong. A new bride who just had her wedding in January is now the only free person in the wedding photo. Her husband and friends have all been detained by the Chinese regime. 55 pro-democratic activists were involved in organizing the 2020 Hong Kong pro-democracy primaries. Beijing claimed the primaries are illegal and charged 47 of the activists for, quote, conspiracy to subvert state power. Nicole Yu's husband and their friends are among the 47 people. Last Thursday, Yu arrived at a detention center in Hong Kong. She was hoping to see her detained husband, Lester Shum, but he was already transferred to a prison, alongside with other 8 pro-democracy activists. Yu did not get notified until she had waited there for an hour. Yu posted on Facebook her wedding photo from January. She was with her husband and their friends. But now she is the only one who is still free. Yu wrote in the caption, on January 25th, I was so happy to take photos with you guys. We were laughing and saying we had a lot of fun after the wedding ceremony, but now I'm the only one left. A Chinese state-backed investment project worth $20 billion is crumbling. The funds were meant for the country's failing semiconductor industry. After struggling for a year, one of China's major microchip-making firms is asking employees to resign without compensation. NTD's Chen Han has more.
Major microchip maker Wuhan Hongshin Semiconductor, or HSMC, announced a full layoff of all its employees. The Chinese regime had poured nearly $20 billion into developing the company and its semiconductor industry. Stimulated by the government's subsidies and incentives, the industry boomed, with HSMC taking the lead. It was all part of an effort to combat U.S. sanctions, which blocked U.S. microchip technology from making its way to China. HSMC had said 10% of that investment was directly supplied by Wuhan's Dongxihu district. The company also claimed to independently own 14-nanometer chip technology, adding that it expected to be able to process 7-nanometer chips within a year. HSMC's projects were listed as major province-level projects in 2018 and 2019. But the company's problems soon started to go public, including a lack of funding and expertise, plus delayed projects. U.S.-based China affairs analyst Qin Peng says the Chinese regime had a hand in the industry's downfall.
As an innovative project, it actually requires a lot of time, personnel, and talented input. But these officials are all running after short-term political achievements, so they don't have the patience for that.
When the city of Wuhan finally took over HSMC, only a mere $1.5 million were left in its bank account. Soon after, local officials announced HSMC would be unable to continue production. After over a year in suspension, the possibility that the company could pick up where it left off has diminished, prompting the full layoffs. All staff members were required to resign by March 5th, but reports say hundreds of employees now refuse to leave. They say they're not satisfied with the terms of their resignation and that the company offered them no compensation plan or explanation. Former Huawei engineer Jin Chun says he expects a wave of more company collapses in China's semiconductor industry.
The CCP's totalitarian regime is not good for the high-end semiconductor industry. The regime is not suitable for technological innovation because it lacks a free and healthy cultural environment to promote it.
A report by the Semiconductor Industry International Association stated China would have the world's largest number of chip factories in 2021. But that prediction isn't looking good, as many related projects have already failed or been suspended, leaving much of the industry's billion-dollar equipment idle. Chun Han, NTD News.
The media's attention is turning towards China's economic growth. The country's 2.3% growth rate for 2020 has been widely touted by Western media, calling it by far the best performance of any major economy. The numbers show a slowdown from China's 6% or higher average in recent years. But a look at data from the country's National Bureau of Statistics shows some of the country's numbers don't quite add up. China's economy is mainly driven by a trio of factors: investment, consumer spending, and exports. The Chinese regime's latest report says its investment was up 2.9% in 2020 compared to 2019. But the country's investment, based on its fixed assets, is only over 51 trillion yuan. That's a major decrease from its 55 trillion in 2019. As for consumer spending, the regime reported a 3.9% decrease from last year. But the official report, coming in at 39 trillion yuan in consumer spending, is actually 4.8% less than 2019, a year marked by 41 trillion in spending. China's economic figures are notorious for proving inaccurate. There are even inconsistencies between official statistics as well. The regime has openly admitted to falsifying data, but usually blames the mistakes on local authorities. A New York Federal Reserve report shows that China's official numbers have become almost unrealistically smooth over time compared to authentic data, making them less believable. An Australian broadcaster says it's suspending 2 Chinese TV providers from its airwaves after receiving a human rights complaint. Emma McCarthy reports.
Australian broadcaster SBS said it was suspending the broadcast of Chinese TV news services CGTN and CCTV after receiving a human rights complaint. An SBS spokesman told Reuters that SBS was reviewing a complaint from a human rights organisation. A story on the SBS News website said human rights organisation Safeguard Defenders wrote to SBS after Britain's media regulator revoked the licence of CGTN due to serious non-compliance offences. SBS reported the letter from Safeguard Defenders as saying the CCTV broadcasts involved the extraction, packaging and airing of forced and false confessions of prisoners held under conditions of duress and torture. China's foreign ministry in Beijing did not immediately respond to a request for comment.
Britain's media regulator Ofcom is imposing financial penalties on Chinese state-owned broadcaster CGTN. It's for serious violations of British broadcasting regulations. A former UK consulate employee in Hong Kong and a victim of a forced TV confession, Simon Cheng welcomes the news.
Well, I'm very pleased and I feel that it's a significant moment for me.
Ofcom will sanction CGTN's former license holder in the UK, Star China Media Limited. It's for airing forced TV confessions, that of Simon Cheng, as well as a Swedish book publisher. Separately, Ofcom fined the Chinese broadcaster the equivalent of $140,000 for previously airing forced TV confessions of UK citizen Peter Humphrey. CGTN was also fined the equivalent of $170,000 for failing to comply with UK impartiality laws during its coverage of pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong. Last month, Ofcom revoked the broadcasting license for CGTN because the television network was ultimately controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. Under UK law, license holders cannot be controlled by political bodies. But France is treating CGTN very differently. France's media watchdog, CSA, approved last week CGTN's application for a broadcasting license. This allows CGTN to resume airing programs in close to 50 European countries, including the UK. This despite the fact that CGTN got its license revoked in the UK last month. Last December, CGTN applied for a license in France, aiming to continue broadcasting in the 47 member countries of the Council of Europe. According to French law, non-European channels can operate in those 47 countries under two conditions: if their programs are aired via French satellites or if their communication links are located in France. And CGTN meets these two conditions. But the French media watchdog says it will pay special attention if the Chinese state-owned broadcaster airs content that incites hatred and violence. It is still unclear what will happen to CGTN in the UK and in Europe. China wanted to buy an airport in northern Finland. They said it was to do climate research at the North Pole. But Finland's defense ministry rejected the order over security reasons. NTD's Kevin Hogan brings us the details.
The state-funded Polar Research Institute of China wanted to buy an airport at Kemijärvi in Lapland, Finland's most northern region. The Chinese regime was reportedly planning to use this base as a forward post to send flights over the Arctic region. In January of 2018, Chinese research institutes and a military expert offered to buy the airport from the city of Kemijärvi. The proposal has now been revealed to the public. The Chinese Research Institute's director led the proposal, and a Chinese major who was an assistant to the military part of the Chinese embassy in the country assisted. China told Finland it wanted the airbase to do climate and environmental research. Finland's proximity to the North Pole would allow them to conduct research on the amount of ice coverage. China would have used the airport to launch jet aircraft with measuring equipment around the North Pole and back. And the airport would open up another flight route, the one over the Arctic Ocean and Northeast Passage. They could make observations there if they had the airbase in this area. China and Russia are both interested in this area. Kemijärvi's mayor said that Northeast Passage is important, and all of the major powers want to know what kind of traffic is possible there. A consultant at Finland's Ministry of Defense told media company Yleisradio Oy it was unlikely the airbase would be sold because it's right next to a strategically important firing range. And what's more, certain EU restrictions on foreign investment would have also impeded the deal, they said. A professor at the University of Lapland who specializes in Chinese affairs also weighed in. He told the local outlet he sees the proposal as further evidence of China's global aspirations. Kevin Hogan, NTD News.
Lord Philip Hunt is one of the most proactive peers to tackle forced organ harvesting in China. We spoke to him about what he's done so far and his next moves on the issue. NTD's Elle Rhodes has the story.
Lord Hunt says he wants to prevent forced organ harvesting in China. He introduced an amendment for a medicine bill that will allow the government to demand proof of consent for tissues obtained from overseas. As the first of its kind, it passed in January.
It's a small step, but it's an important step, both in the UK and internationally, to make clear that the use of enforced organ donations is totally abhorrent, and we want to see it stopped.
Last year, the London-based China Tribunal concluded beyond a reasonable doubt that state-sanctioned forced organ harvesting from prisoners of conscience had taken place for years in China on a significant scale and is still taking place. Lord Hunt says he has more on his shopping list.
My principal change would be to prevent organ tourism. We know people from the United Kingdom travel to China in order to have an organ donation. which they pay a lot of money for. I'd like to make it illegal for British people to do that.
Additionally, Lord Hunt wants to ban exhibitions of plastinated bodies, like real bodies, in the UK. Some human rights groups argue those likely come from prisoners of conscience. He also wants to prevent UK companies from being complicit by providing medical equipment like preservation devices. He admits there are economic risks and consequences involved in moving forward with such laws.
And if a country like the United Kingdom, that is not without influence in the world, takes this stand, I hope it will be a big influence on other countries as well. That's what we have to hope. In the end, we have to do the right thing.
He says the UK has a responsibility to take action. Earl Rhodes, NTD News.
And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching and see you tomorrow.